Welcome to the channel where legends sleep. Tonight's story takes us to the dust-golden plains of ancient India, where the great Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, breathes like a living thing, vast, relentless, and older than memory itself. From within its countless thousands of verses, one figure emerges not as a god, not as a king, but as something far more heartbreaking, a warrior without a home in the world that made him. He was born of sunlight and secret shame, abandoned on a river before he ever drew his first breath, and yet he grew into a man whose arrows could split the heavens. He was loyal, fearless, and utterly magnificent, and the world rewarded him with betrayal at every turn. His name was Karna, and his story is not merely of battle, but of what it means to burn brilliantly in a life that was never truly yours. So lie back, breathe slowly, and let the ancient world take over. There is a river in this story, and it carries everything. But we begin before the river. We begin with a girl. Her name was Kunti, and she was a princess of remarkable composure. The kind of young woman who learned early that the world watches royal daughters closely, and so she learned to keep her inner life very quiet. She had been given, as a gift of sorts, a mantra by a wandering sage named Durvasa, who was known as much for his temper as for his wisdom. The mantra was simple and terrifying. Speak it with devotion toward any god, and that god would come to her. It was the kind of gift that sounds wonderful until you actually think about it. Kunti was young. She was curious, and one morning before the rest of the palace had stirred, she stood at her window and watched the sun rise over the plains of Hastinapura, that slow, warm spill of gold across the earth. And she spoke the mantra toward Surya, the sun god, because she wanted to know if it was real. It was real. Surya came in his full radiance, not a vision, not a dream. He came, luminous and vast, and entirely too present for a quiet morning. Kunti, to her credit, held her composure. She explained that she had spoken out of curiosity, not longing, and begged him to leave without consequence. But a mantra spoken truly cannot be unspoken. What had been set in motion would complete itself. Surya was not cruel about this. There was sorrow in him, if a god of light can carry sorrow. And he promised her one mercy. Her honor among the world would remain untouched, and she would be restored to herself as though nothing had passed. The child, though, the child was already decided. She carried him in secret, months of careful stillness, of loose robes, and held breath and prayers that no one thought to ask about. When the boy finally came, she understood immediately that this was no ordinary child. He arrived in the world already wearing something no mortal infant should possess. A shining armor fused to his skin like a second soul, and earrings that caught the light in a way that light does not normally agree to. Celestial gifts from his father. They were beautiful, They were also unmistakable. She held him for one night. Let that sit for a moment. One night, she held this luminous, impossible child, this boy who smelled of sunlight and warm cedar, who watched her with eyes that already seemed to know more than they should. She did not name him then. She understood, in the cold arithmetic of her situation, that a princess with an inexplicable infant was not a story that ended quietly. Her future, her family's standing, the life she had yet to live, all of it hung in the balance of the next few hours. So she wept, and then she did what mothers in impossible positions have done since the world began making things impossible. She made him a small boat, a basket really, sealed with wax and lined with soft cloth, and she placed him inside it as carefully as a person can place something they are trying to convince themselves will be all right. She whispered over him, not the mantra this time, something softer, something wordless, and then she carried him to the river. The Ganga was still in the early morning, silver and unhurried, moving with the calm authority of something that has been moving since before anyone was alive to notice. Kunti set the basket on the water and did not look away until she could no longer see it. Some versions of this story say she looked away immediately. Those versions are wrong. The river carried him south and east through the long morning, past reed banks where birds were waking, past the muddy shorelines of smaller villages, past fishermen who glanced up and then looked again, uncertain what they were seeing. That faint golden shimmer on the water that might have been sunlight and might have been something else entirely. He came to rest near a city called Champa, on the banks where a charioteer named Adhiratha was walking with his wife Radha. Radha found the basket. She opened it, and she did what Kunti had not been able to do. She chose him completely and without reservation, in the uncomplicated way that love sometimes arrives when it has no reason to be complicated. She called him Vasasena first, for the wealth of gifts he seemed to carry with him. Later, he would be called Karna, but in those first days he was simply her son, wrapped in ordinary cloth now, nursed and held and sung to in a modest house that smelled of horses and cooking fires and river mud. He was radiant. He was safe. He was loved. He had no idea what he was. And the river moved on, as rivers always do, carrying no record of what it had held, leaving nothing behind but the faint sound of water over smooth stone, a sound very much like a secret being kept. Years passed the way they do in quiet homes, not all at once, but in small surrenders. A child who once fit in the crook of an arm learns to walk, then run, then disappear over the hill before supper. Radha watched her boy with the particular pride of a mother who suspects she is raising something she cannot fully account for. Karna grew. That is perhaps the simplest way to say it, and also the most incomplete. He was not merely tall, though he was tall. He was not merely strong, though other boys his age stopped challenging him sometime around his 12th year, after an incident involving a wrestling match and a bruised dignity that the other boy never quite recovered from. What Karna had was something harder to name, a quality of attention, a stillness at the center of movement, as though the world around him was always moving a little faster than it needed to. He took to the bow the way water takes to a slope, naturally, inevitably, with no apparent effort and absolute precision. His father Adiratha, a good man who smelled of leather and axle grease and asked very little of the world, watched his son loose arrow after arrow into targets set farther and farther away, and felt the particular bittersweet weight of a parent who understands that what he loves is already outgrowing him. So Karna went to study. He sought out the great teachers, the ones whose names were spoken in the same breath as the gods who had first taught men to fight. He was a diligent student, meticulous, patient, in a way that surprised people who expected a young man burning with obvious talent to also burn with obvious impatience. He learned, he mastered, he surpassed. And then he came to the tournament. The field at Hastinapura blazed with color on the day the princes of the Kuru line were to display their training before the court. Flags snapped in a warm wind. The smell of crushed grass and sandalwood hung in the air. The crowd pressed against the wooden barriers, jostling for a view of something they had been promised would be remarkable. They were not wrong. Arjuna performed that day with a grace that drew a long, collective exhale from the crowd, a sound like wind moving through tall grass. He was brilliant. He was precise. He moved through his sequences with the ease of a man doing something he was simply born to do. Then Karna walked onto the field. He had not been invited. He had simply arrived, armored in his own particular composure, and asked, in a voice that carried without being raised, whether he might demonstrate what he could do. What followed silenced a crowd in a different way. Not the exhale of appreciation, but the held breath of astonishment. Karna matched every feat Arjuna had performed, then added several more, unhurried, as though he were making a point without quite saying it aloud. For a moment, one suspended golden moment, something close to possibility hung over that field. Then the questions began. What is his lineage? Who is his father? A warrior must be of noble blood to compete with princes. These are the rules. These have always been the rules. The teacher Drona said it calmly, which made it land harder. Kripacharya repeated it with the precision of a man who finds comfort in procedure. The crowd shifted and murmured, and the moment that had opened closed again, like a door swung shut on a warm room. Karna stood very still. He was, at his core, a man who understood the difference between an argument and a wall. Arguments could be answered. Walls simply stood. The faces around him were not cruel exactly. Cruelty requires a certain energy, a willingness to engage. These faces were something quieter and in some ways worse. Indifferent. He did not belong to the category of person the rules were written for, and the rules were, for those who wrote them, simply the rules. Somewhere behind him he heard laughter. It came from the Pandava side of the gallery, a young man's laugh, easy and careless in the way that only the genuinely secure can be careless. Karna did not turn around. As the silence stretched past comfort and toward something more like verdict, a single figure descended from the royal gallery. Duryodhana, the eldest son of King Dhritarashtra, moved with the deliberate unhurry of someone who has decided what he is about to do and finds the decision satisfying. He was not conventionally good, Duryodhana. History would not be kind to him, and not without reason. He had appetites and grudges and a particular talent for seeing the world in terms of what he deserved and what was being withheld from him. These were genuine flaws, but he also had in that moment something rare, the ability to see Karna, not the charioteer's son, not the problem of lineage, not the procedural inconvenience, standing on the grass with arrows still in his quiver. Duryodhana saw a warrior. He saw, perhaps more usefully, a warrior who had just been publicly humiliated by the same family Duryodhana happened to resent with every fiber of his complicated heart. He walked to Karna and stood beside him, facing the gallery. If the man cannot compete because he holds no kingdom, Duryodhana said, then let him hold one. Here, now. I give him Anga. The silence that followed had a different texture than the silence before it. Karna turned to look at the man beside him. Duryodhana was watching the gallery with an expression of mild, almost bored defiance, the look of someone who has played a move in a game and is entirely willing to see where it goes. He did not look at Karna the way a benefactor looks at a recipient. He looked at him the way one fighter looks at another across a courtyard, with recognition. Karna had spent his young life pressing against walls and finding them immovable. Here, for the first time, was someone who had simply knocked one down on his behalf, with no apparent concern for the rubble. The gratitude Karna felt in that moment was the deep kind, not the quick warmth of a gift received, but the slower, heavier loyalty of a man who has been seen when the world was actively looking away. It settled into him like water into dry ground. So it was that Karna, son of Radha, son of Adiratha the charioteer, became a king before sundown. The crowd found its voice again, reshaping itself around the new fact, the way crowds do. The Pandavas exchanged glances. Arjuna's face moved through something complicated and came to rest on an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite unease. Night came slowly over Hastinapura, the kind of evening that lingers reluctant to give up the warmth of the day. Somewhere in the city, torches were being lit. Somewhere, a new king sat in the unfamiliar weight of a crown and turned it over in his mind. He had been given a throne. He had been given a brother in all but blood. He had been given, at last, a place to stand. Still, Something in him must have known, in the quiet way that deep things are known before they are understood, that the walls had not disappeared. They had simply parted, briefly, to let him through. And somewhere ahead, in the long country of the years to come, they were waiting. The years that followed were neither quiet nor kind, though they wore the costume of both from time to time. Karna ruled his gifted kingdom of Anga with the same seriousness he had brought to every other thing in his life. He trained, he gave. Travelers who stopped at his gate rarely left empty-handed. It was said that Karna had never once refused a request made in genuine need. And the people who told that story told it the way you tell a story about something you have witnessed with your own eyes, rather than merely heard. He was a king, yes. More than that, he was the kind of man people invented proverbs about. But the world was tilting slowly toward war. The quarrel between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, between Duryodhana's 100 brothers and their 5 cousins, had been simmering long enough that most of the great courts of that age had quietly chosen a side. Alliances were made over hunting trips and wedding feasts. Old debts were counted. And in the heavens above, where the gods watch the turning of mortal lives with the attentiveness of people who have nothing else to do, certain preparations were underway. Indra noticed the armor first, not that it was difficult to notice. Karna had worn it since birth. The divine Kavach and Kundala, the breastplate and earrings that Surya had woven into his son's very skin, as inseparable from him as breath. They made him, for practical purposes, very nearly impossible to kill. Indra, king of the gods and father of Arjuna, the greatest warrior among the Pandavas, was aware of this problem with the focused clarity of a man staring at an obstacle between himself and something he wants. So Indra did what gods occasionally do when they want something a mortal possesses. He disguised himself as a Brahmin priest, dusty-footed and mild, and arrived at Karna's gate on a morning like any other. Karna was in the middle of his prayers when the old man appeared, and there are those who believe that Surya himself whispered a warning into his son's ear. A father's voice carried on the light, telling him not to give what the stranger would ask. Karna heard the warning. He considered it. Then he rose, touched the feet of the disguised god with the courtesy he showed every visitor, and asked what he could do. The Brahmin asked for his armor, the armor that was also his skin, the armor that was the only reason he would survive the coming war. There was a long pause, long enough that even Indra, who had done this sort of thing before, seemed to hold what passed for breath. Then Karna reached up, and with his own hands he removed the kavach from his flesh. A slow and bloody act, done without ceremony, and held it out. He had decided, it seems, that a man who turns away a Brahmin's honest request is no longer the man he has spent his life trying to be. Better to bleed than to flinch. Indra, shaken in the way that only genuine virtue can shake a god, felt something that might have been shame. He offered a gift in return, a single divine weapon, the Vasavi Shakti, a spear that would kill whatever it was thrown at, once and once only. Karna accepted. He knew what he had traded. He folded the knowledge away quietly and went back to his prayers. The second loss came from a different direction entirely. Parashurama was the most formidable teacher alive in that age, a warrior sage who had consecrated himself entirely to the Brahmin caste and refused to teach anyone born outside it. Karna, who wanted to learn from the greatest and had learned by now that the truth of his birth would close doors, presented himself as a Brahmin student. Parashurama accepted him. For years, master and student walked together through forests and riversides, and the accumulated weight of ancient knowledge. Karna learned more in that time than most warriors learn in a lifetime. The unraveling arrived on an ordinary afternoon. Parashurama had fallen asleep, with his head resting in Karna's lap. A worm, or what appeared to be a worm, though the old stories look at it sideways, as if a creature had been sent, began to bore into Karna's thigh. The pain was considerable. Still, Karna sat without moving, without making a sound, unwilling to disturb his teacher's rest. He bled silently into the grass while the sun moved overhead. When Parashurama woke and found the wound, he understood at once what it meant. No Brahmin could have endured that without crying out. Only a warrior, trained from childhood to swallow pain, could sit that still. He looked at the young man in front of him. This student he had loved, truly loved across years of teaching, and the betrayal and the grief arrived together. The curse he spoke was precise. On the day Karna needed the most powerful knowledge Parashurama had given him, it would not come. The crucial invocation would slip his memory like water through a cupped hand, and he would be unable to call it back. Karna received this curse the way he had received the loss of his armor, without argument, without excuse. He bowed. He thanked his teacher for everything he had been taught. Parashurama, who had expected anger and found none, turned away with something unreadable in his face. And so Karna carried that too. The third encounter was the one that cost the most, because it asked something of his heart rather than his body. She came to him at night. He was standing alone beside a river. He was often alone beside rivers, as if the water reminded him of something he couldn't name, when he became aware of a woman approaching through the pale light. She was not young. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who has rehearsed a conversation many times and is no longer certain any version of it will go well. He knew her before she reached him. He had always known her in the way you recognize a melody you were never taught but somehow already understand. Kunti, his mother. She told him everything. Her youthful prayer to Surya, the child born in secret, the basket set adrift on the Ganga. She told him his name, his true name, older than Karna, older than the charioteer's household, was Vasusena. She told him he was the eldest of the Pandava brothers, that Arjuna was his brother, that all 5 of them carried the same blood. She told him that if he crossed to their side, he would stand not as an ally but as a prince, acknowledged and celebrated, and the world would open before him like a door someone had forgotten to lock. The river moved. The moonlight held them both in a silver stillness. Karna listened to all of it. He let the words settle into him, every one, and for a moment the shape of another life was visible. The life where none of the humiliations had happened, where the name had always fit, where the armor had never needed to be removed. Then he spoke. He told her that Duryodhana had stood for him when no one else would. That a man does not abandon the friend who reached into the crowd and pulled him out of it, not for a throne, not for brothers he has never been allowed to call brothers, not even for the truth. He told her with great gentleness that he understood why she had done what she did with the basket and the river and the long silence afterward. He did not ask her to explain it again. He made her one promise. He would not kill any of the Pandava brothers except Arjuna. And if Arjuna fell to him, she would still have 5 sons when it was over. He simply could not promise her which 5. Kunti wept. Karna did not look away. When she was gone, he stood at the river's edge for a long time. The water moved the way it always had, unhurried, indifferent, carrying everything downstream without being asked. He had made his choice. He had made it knowing that the side he stood on would not win, that the curses stacked inside him would fall due at the worst possible moment, that his mother had offered him a door, and he had chosen to remain in the room he was already in. There was no blindness in it. Every cost was visible, weighed, and accepted. Somewhere, perhaps, Surya watched his son standing alone beside the water, and understood the particular pride a parent feels when a child exceeds them, not in power, not in fortune, but in the quieter and more difficult business of being entirely, stubbornly themselves. The war was coming. Karna straightened, turned from the river, and walked back toward the light of the camp where Duryodhana was waiting. Behind him, the water carried on its long work without him, as rivers always do. The plains of Kurukshetra had been chosen because they were old and flat and empty, which is what you need when 2 families mean to destroy each other. Armies gathered from every direction, filling the land with the sound of drums, elephants, and the particular low roar of thousands of men who have not yet decided whether they are afraid. The air smelled of charcoal and river mud and something sharper underneath. Iron, perhaps, or anticipation, which has a smell of its own. 18 days. That was how long it lasted. To speak of all 18 would take longer than sleep allows, so listen instead to what mattered most, the shape of Karna's part in it. He did not fight in the opening days. Bhishma, the great patriarch, commanded the Kaurava forces first, and Bhishma had made plain that he would not stand on the same field as Karna. Old pride, old wounds, the kind of grievance that calcifies over decades into something indistinguishable from principle. So Karna waited. He sat apart from the noise and watched the smoke rise each evening over the plain, and he did not complain, because complaining was not part of his code. When Bhishma fell, pierced by so many arrows that his body rested above the earth on a bed of them rather than touching the ground, Karna walked forward without being asked. He fought for 10 days. On the field, he was everything the stories said he was. His bow moved so fast that men who faced him later struggled to describe what they had seen. Only that the arrows had come and kept coming, and that there had been a figure at the center of it all who seemed entirely calm, not cold. Calm. There is a difference. Cold men fight without feeling. Karna felt everything and fought anyway, which is the harder thing. He honored his promise to Kunti. When he faced the Pandava brothers, who were not Arjuna, he defeated them and let them live. Pulling back at the moment he could have ended it. 4 times he did this. 4 brothers walked away from Karna when they had no right to expect to. He carried his mother's moonlit bargain like a stone in his chest, and he kept it. Even as the war ground on, and keeping it cost him tactical advantages he could not afford to lose. As the night deepened into the 16th day, the mood among the Kauravas had shifted. They were losing, and they knew it the way a building knows it before it falls. Something settling wrong. Some weight redistributed that cannot be corrected. Duryodhana came to Karna's tent and sat with him the way he had sat with him in those early days after the tournament, when the world had been smaller and the problems had felt manageable. They did not speak much. They had long since said the things that needed saying. The 17th day came up gray and cool. Karna's charioteer that day was Shalya, a king pressed into service by a twist of politics. And Shalya, it must be said, was not on Karna's side in any meaningful sense. He drove the chariot and spent the journey to the field, delivering a quiet, relentless commentary on Karna's unworthiness, his origins, his odds. It was, in its own way, a kind of weapon. Karna had faced contempt before. He had learned to let it move through him like wind through a doorway, present, felt, and gone. He did not ask Shalya to stop. He simply kept his eyes on the field ahead. And so it was that the 17th day became the stage on which everything collected. The curse from Parashurama woke first. In the middle of the battle, reaching for a particular technique, one of those he had memorized beneath the old master's tutelage, lying quietly while Parashurama slept. The knowledge slipped from him, not gradually, all at once, like a lamp going out. He reached for the incantation and found only silence where it had lived. He had known this might happen. Knowing a thing is coming does not make it arrive any more gently. Then the earth took his wheel. His chariot lurched. The right wheel had found some soft place in the ground, churned earth, soaked with 3 days of blood and dew, and it sank slowly and with great finality, until the axle was tilting and the horses were straining sideways, and the chariot was going nowhere. Karna dropped from the chariot and took hold of the wheel with both hands. This was not metaphor. He put his hands around the wooden rim and pulled, his feet planted in the mud. And for a long moment, he was simply a man trying to free a wheel from the ground. The same effort any farmer might make, any driver on any road, except that Arjuna's arrows were finding the range, and the air was loud with the sound of the Pandava army readying itself. He called out to Arjuna. He asked, as the rules of ancient warfare allowed, for a moment, a warrior on foot, unarmed, asking his opponent to hold. His voice was steady. Whatever he felt, his voice was steady. Arjuna hesitated. There was something human in that hesitation. Arjuna was not a cruel man, and what he saw was a man in the mud with his hands on a wheel, and some part of him wanted to wait. But Krishna, who drove Arjuna's chariot and who saw the whole board always, spoke. He reminded Arjuna of everything, of Abhimanyu, Arjuna's son, killed by a circle of warriors when he was alone and unarmed and very young. He reminded him of the rules that had already been broken on the other side, the courtesies already discarded. The time for ceremony, Krishna said, had passed some days ago. The arrow came. Karna saw it. He had time to see it, which perhaps was mercy, and perhaps was not. He straightened from the wheel. He let go of it. He stood up in the mud on the plain of Kurukshetra, and he turned to face what was coming. And his expression, by all accounts of those who watched from both sides, was not afraid. There was something in his bearing in that last moment that stopped people, something that made the battlefield briefly quiet in the way that a room goes quiet when someone important enters it. He had been denied his armor, denied his knowledge, denied the ground beneath his wheel, and denied the mercy of a pause. And still he stood as though none of these things were the final word on who he was. The light on the plain that day was the low golden light of late afternoon, the kind that makes everything look like it is already a memory. It caught the planes of his face. It lay across the churned mud and the distant banners of both armies. Karna fell the way great fires fall, not all at once, but settling, the last of the heat rising slowly upward into air that was already beginning to cool. On the Kaurava side, a sound went through the army, not a shout, something lower and harder to name. Duryodhana heard it from where he stood among his commanders, and he understood what it meant before anyone told him, the way you understand some news before the words arrive. On the Pandava side, Arjuna stood over what he had done, and the victory felt nothing like he had imagined victory would feel. Krishna placed a hand briefly on his shoulder and said nothing, which was the only right response. The sun, indifferent and punctual, continued its descent toward the western edge of the plain. Somewhere far from the field, the river Ganga moved through its long course, past cities and temples, and the quiet banks where washerwomen worked at dusk. The same river that had carried a small basket once on a morning before any of this had happened, when the world had not yet decided what to do with the child inside it. The river remembered nothing and carried everything forward, as rivers do, which is perhaps the most honest relationship anything has ever had with the past. The 17th day ended. The 18th would come, and after that, the silence that follows great things, wide and strange and full of questions no one quite knows how to ask yet. The 18th day came and went, as days must. The armies, what remained of them, stood in fields that had forgotten what grass looked like. The banners hung without wind. Men who had spent years training for glory found, at the end of it, that they had nothing particular to say. That is often how great things conclude, not with proclamation, but with a long, quiet exhale and the slow business of counting who had not come home. And so it was that Yudhishthira, eldest of the Pandavas, walked among the fallen. He had won. The word felt strange in his mouth, too large and too hollow at once, like a golden cup with no bottom. He walked not in triumph, but in something closer to bewilderment, picking his way through the settling dust of Kurukshetra, where the earth still smelled of iron and cedar smoke and the particular silence that follows thunder. He came, in time, to where Karna lay. His mother, Kunti, found him there a moment later. She had been walking too, though no one had seen her leave the camp. She moved through the field like a woman who had been carrying a stone for 50 years and had only just set it down. When she reached her firstborn son, the son she had named, then unnamed, then kept secret like a wound she could not show anyone, she knelt beside him and wept without covering her face. Yudhishthira watched her and understood, all at once, what he had not understood before. The revelation broke over him slowly, the way light comes through clouds. Not a single flash, but a gradual brightening that makes you realize how dark it had been. Karna, the charioteer's son, the warrior they had mocked and faced and finally killed. He was Kunti's child. He was their eldest brother. He was, by blood and by right, a Pandava. Yudhishthira sat down in the dust. There is a grief that has no clean name, the grief for a person you wronged without knowing it, for a brother you might have loved, for a war that might have ended differently if one truth had been spoken 20 years sooner. It is a quiet grief. It does not roar. It simply settles over you, warm and heavy, like a blanket left too long in the sun. He sat with it for a long while. The story of Karna's birth was told then, fully, to all who remained. Spoken aloud at last, the secret lost its long shadow. People heard it and went still. Warriors who had called him lowborn looked at their own hands. Those who had turned him away from tournaments, who had laughed at the charioteer's son daring to string a hero's bow, they heard, and they understood that what they had mocked was precisely the thing they had always claimed to honor. Sometimes The world does not recognize nobility until it has already lost it. That is one of the world's oldest habits, and one of its least flattering. Still, his name was spoken now with a different weight. Karna, giver of gifts, the man who had parted with his celestial armor when a god came begging and asked for it with a smile. The man who had promised his mother he would not kill her other sons, and kept that promise through the whole long war, though it cost him every strategic advantage he had. The man who had been handed loyalty by Duryodhana when no one else would, and who repaid that loyalty with everything he had, right to the last moment, knowing full well the side he was on, would fall. He had known. That is the part worth sitting with in the quiet. He had chosen anyway, not from blindness, not from stubbornness, but from the same unshakable sense of what was owed to love and friendship that had governed him his whole life. Some people call that tragic. Others call it the truest form of honor there is. Perhaps it is both, and perhaps that is exactly why his name lasted. In the years that followed the war, when the dust of Kurukshetra had long since settled, and new grass had slowly, tentatively returned to the field, people spoke of Karna the way they speak of something rare, a solar eclipse, or a river that runs clear in a dry season, something that makes you stop and look up. His story was told to children at evening time, when the lamps were low and the air smelled of warm earth and cooking fires. Parents told it not as a lesson with a tidy moral, but simply as something true, that a person can be generous in want, loyal in loss, and dignified in sorrow, and that these things belong to no lineage, no title, no throne. They are carried in the self or not at all. So let him rest now, this son of the sun, this warrior of the unwavering hand. Let the river that carried him once carry him gently still, forward as rivers do, into the soft and waiting dark. The story has told itself to its end, and you, who have listened all this way, may close your eyes now. Rest well.